Hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast. This is going to be a weekly thing where I read a particular self-development book and then I take the actions out of that book and discuss what it has done for me, what it hasn't done for me, and what you can do. So I guess this is going to be a weekly segment where I sit down by myself and I talk. So if you've clicked on, thanks for clicking on. This week's episode is going to be about habits, how you can build them, how you can maintain them, and how they've helped me in my life and how I believe they're going to continue to help me throughout my journey. So in my diary, the first thing that I wanted to talk about was starting with small habits and showing up every day. I think this is a really crucial factor in building a path towards your future, towards your success, if that is what you're aiming for. And I think so many of us, I love this quote, overestimate what we can do in 6 months and underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And I've been a culprit of this, where you go through something, you have this spike in motivation or this surge to do something, and you'll either research for 5 hours one day or you go to the gym for 3 hours one day. And this lasts only about 4 or 5 days until you start feeling like you don't want to do that anymore. You don't have that motivation. You're really struggling to keep up with that initial motivation that you felt from an early stage. And I think when that does happen, although you do have a spike in your initial gains, over time it is just unsustainable because you haven't built the foundations to try and maintain that. And so essentially that was pretty much my whole life. My teens, my early 20s, that was me. A big thought in my head had come up and I would try and act on it by going as hard as possible, but I had no foundations to sustain it. So after about a week or a month, or if I was lucky 2 or 3 months, it would die off. I think what's been really game-changing and influential for me has been making small habits and just showing up every day. And by small habits, for 2 or 3 months this year of my life, showed up to the gym for about 10 to 15 minutes a day and went home. I just didn't want to work out. But I knew that if I didn't show up for 1 day or 2 days in a row, then I wouldn't be able to show up the next day and then the day after that. And then that week break would turn into a month, which would turn into 6 months, and it would be just so much harder for me to come back. And so when I did do that, I got used to the atmosphere, I got used to the people around the gym, and even though it was 10 minutes, 6 months later I was coming in for 30 minutes, I was coming in for 40 minutes, and it kept growing and growing and growing until I started actually enjoying it. So for people who are trying to find that motivation, I would say ditch that surge. Find the discipline, but also it doesn't even have to be discipline like you're thinking. It doesn't have to be discipline in the sense of, okay, I'm going to start this diet, I'm going to stick to it for 365 days, and I'm not going to have any cheats or anything like that. I think when people talk about discipline, it is kind of pushed as that 100%. But I think for me, something has been lowering that and saying discipline can be just showing up for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes, but just dedicating myself to doing that every single day. A story that I wanted to share with you guys was when I came back from Melbourne not long ago, I had decided after a week of coming back that I'm going to take my mum and dad to the gym every morning. My dad has never been to a gym before. He's 50 years old. My mum has been, but she also had those surges where she would go for six months or 3 months, and then, she hadn't been for about a year before that. Anyways, I walked into my house and I just said, Dad, we're going to the gym. We're going to sign up to the gym. Let's get a membership for you. And he had some, initial protests, as you would if you've never been to the gym before. It's quite a daunting place, as some of you would know. But after some convincing, I took him down, and all I did with him was 5 minutes on the bike, every morning and 5 minutes on the treadmill. So a 10-minute session. We went home every morning after 15 minutes. He got ready and he got to work. After 4 days of doing that, I noticed he started staying longer than I wanted to stay. It just clicked. It clicked then and there that if you want someone to do something, if you want to encourage someone to do something that they've never done, going full on from the very start, although it may seem beneficial, probably isn't. Something like taking someone to the gym who has never been there, maybe the best thing that you can do, as I've learned from my dad, is take them for 10 minutes. Take them for a time where they feel like they've got nothing out of it, where they feel like they can keep going, and just cut the session. Take them home, keep them excited to go tomorrow. And, we've been now going for 7 days. He's stuck to it. He wakes up earlier than me now. And there's not really any complaints anymore. And I really feel that this is going to go on for a long, long time. So that's been really massive for me. Consider this as well. My dad, we'd tried to get him on some fitness programs or exercises, and he would have the initial objections, and after a while he would not like it anymore, so he would stop. He's been now riding, it's 1.5 kilometers on the little standing bike every day. Now that might not seem like much to you, it's 5 minutes of riding a bike, but in the span of 7 days, that is more kilometers than he's ever ridden in his 50 years of living on this planet. We've walked on the treadmill for 5 minutes, which is about 0.75 of a kilometre. And again, he obviously has walked more than that, but maybe not consecutively. Maybe he hasn't put himself to the task of walking that consecutively in one stint, or doing that for an extended period of time throughout an extended period of days. And so this man, over the period of a week, has done more physical exercise for his body than he probably ever has. Now, if we span that across 6 months, the numbers speak for themselves. The last 6 months would have been more than he could have ever imagined that he would do in his life, especially at the age of 50. Another story is the same thing. I brought my friend Robert to the gym with me 2 weeks ago. Again, I would have usually tried to make him do what I do. Have some longer sessions, have some extended sessions, and try and shadow him. But I knew that for someone who had never really been to the gym and never experienced that I had to keep the session short, and I had to keep alive his want and motivation to be there. So again, we just did 30-minute sessions, not too intense, not too hard. I kept his body in decent shape. And I'm no personal trainer, by the way. This is all founded on the idea of marginal gain, on the idea of atomic habits. And, we did 30 sessions a day. And again, by the 4th or 5th day, he was messaging me excited to go. He was the one prompting me to go now. He was the one saying, let's go 30 minutes earlier today. Let's go now. Let's go. What are we doing today? Let's do back. So it really just showed that this is a pattern forming here. People who have never done this before, and even experienced campaigners, if you're lacking the motivation, if you're lacking that discipline, just show up. It's all about showing up. Now, a method that I've used for sticking to this is the daily calendar, and also a checklist. So all I did was get a whiteboard from Kmart, and I wrote running, gym, reading. Now my friends have heard me harp on about this for a while now, but I'm going to keep doing it because I really think this has changed my life over the past 6 months. It truly has. You write what increments you want to do from all 3 of those things. So you could write gym 30 minutes, running 1 kilometer, 500 meters, 100 meters, whatever you think you can run, that won't get you too puffed out, that won't get you too exhausted. And then reading, if you're not a big reader, I wasn't a big reader at all, so I just kept myself to 10 pages. Experienced readers could be doing 50 pages or 100 pages, who knows, but for me, it was just 10 pages. Now, that's not much, that's 5 minutes. The kilometre is 5 minutes. The 30-minute session, 30 minutes. But every time you accomplish that, every time you finish that, you tick it off on your whiteboard. You put a little tally for the day you do it. And slowly but surely, without even recognising, you've built up a tally of 20 days. And you add these up and you realise that you've just done 20 kilometres in the last month. You've done 20 kilometres running. You've done 200 pages of a book. You've done the gym for whatever 30 times 20 is, 600 minutes. So I think keeping a tally of what you've done and how you've done it is very important. The one thing it does is it keeps you accountable, and the second thing it does is it gives you a reward at the end of your session. You're doing this for a reason. You're doing this to fill the tally. You're doing it because you know that you've done so well in the past 20 days that you wouldn't be able to live with yourself if you miss a day. You know that if you miss a day, you'll have to cross off all the hard work that you've done. And something like that keeps you very accountable. So I think it's a great measure. If you remember back in primary school, they had similar things. If you were on a good behaviour, they gave you a little gold star next to your name. It's the same concept, a reward for your actions. Skipping to the next page of my diary, one thing that has also helped me keep up with these habits and keep up with this process, this pathway that I've paved for myself, is looking at yourself externally, looking at yourself in the eyes of someone else. So that could be from another person, that could be from your parents, that could be from your friends, that could be from whoever. For me, something interesting is looking at it from a perspective of, if someone was betting on my life, would they want to put money on me? And if they did, would they get return from that money? Would I be a good investment? And looking at it from this perspective has said, okay, if you were a horse or if you were a fighter in a boxing match, what would someone who was betting on you want you to do to succeed in the let's say the boxing match? Well, firstly, they'd want you to prepare as hard as you possibly could. They'd want you to do it consistently over a long period of time, and they'd want to know that you're working very, very hard. And so when I started looking at myself like that, and I started looking at my friends who I really knew were going to probably be successful one day in their lives, I thought, if I were a bettor, I would be putting my chips on them, because they are putting in the work, they are doing what they can to succeed. And I'm betting on that horse, I'm betting on that fighter. And I thought, how could I put myself in that position where people are betting on me to succeed? That is another thing that keeps you accountable, and that keeps me showing up every day. I want people to believe that I'm going to succeed. I want myself to believe that I'm going to succeed. I want to ensure people that their bet is a good one, that I'm a good horse to bet on. Now, this podcast was based on the book Atomic Habits. That book changed my life. It really did. And I would recommend you read it for people who haven't. There's 3 key takeaways from the book. The first, and most clearly, is small habits make a big difference. The second is forget about setting goals and focus on your system instead. Now, I completely acknowledge where this is coming from. This is somewhat contrary to some other books you might have read. I know in Think and Grow Rich, that book was hell-bent on creating a goal. And you probably have heard, and you'll be justified in hearing, that set a goal. Set a goal however long, however far, however much money, whatever you want. Set a goal and work towards that goal. Now, there's different perspectives on it, but from where the author of Atomic Habits is coming from, I can completely understand. His thing is to build habits. And so, especially small habits, incremental habits, you really have no idea about where you're going to end up and when you're going to end up. You just have to trust the process. And in this way, getting rid of that goal, that end goal, ensures that you keep up with the systems you've built, that you keep up with these habits that you've built over time. You don't try and rush things, you don't try and slow things down, you just keep going. You trust the process. Now, there's different ways of looking at things, but I think if you grab this from this book and this from this book and this wisdom from this podcast, that I think that you'll be able to understand that lesson. So, whatever you have read in the past or heard about in the past about setting goals and building systems, I think that is completely valid, and I completely understand where the author is coming from here in getting rid of that financial end goal and just keeping up with your systems. Because, as I said, in 5 years' time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, if you do keep up with those systems, you will have that goal in mind, but you'll be so hell-bent on keeping up with these daily routines that you've implemented that you'll be completely unrecognizable. People won't know who you are because you'll have just been grinding for so long and you'll have improved so dramatically. People will be unsure as to where it even came from. They always say, there's a saying that goes, it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. And I think that's true. People don't acknowledge or people don't see the hard work that you put in behind the scenes. You do. And really, no matter what, to someone, somewhere, no matter how much work you've put in, you will be an overnight success. They will disqualify your achievements as a fluke. But you will know with these systems and with this lack of goal that you just kept showing up. You did it for 10 years, you did it for 5 years, you did it for 15 years. Why you got to where you got to. The last takeaway from Atomic Habits was to build identity-based habits. This is on the premise that you do things. Let me start that again. This is based on the premise that what you do is a direct reflection of how you see yourself, consciously or subconsciously. For example, if I saw myself as a failure, as stupid, as dumb, I wouldn't put in the effort of trying to learn those things or develop in those areas because I've already disregarded that. I've already acknowledged that that's me and that I can't improve in that. I think a big thing with this is don't say things that don't serve a purpose. Don't say things about yourself that don't serve a purpose. I used to say that I was stupid, that I was dumb. In year 12, I got an ATAR that wouldn't get me into any law school in Australia. And rather than saying that I was dumb, I kind of just said the opposite. Now, whether it was justified or not, and I think there is a point where it's delusion, where you can't really just say things like I'm a genius or I'm a multimillionaire without actually earning that. But I disqualified the thought of me being stupid and me being dumb, and I really put my mind into saying, hey, I want to be in a law school, I want to be enrolled and I want to be doing law, and I'm going to work my ass off to get there. And that really led me to a space where I was able to fully lock in, I was able to grind, and I'm now enrolled in one of the best law schools in Australia. Beyond all expectations, beyond all odds. Now, I don't know whether I want to pursue law in the future, whether I want to be a lawyer. Going to law school has made me question that. And as funny as that is, but it did create something in my mind that made me think that if I put aside my negative thoughts about myself and I work to something that I want to work to, that I can get there. I can get there no matter what, because I have the opportunities, I have the work ethic, and all I have to do is just ditch my negative attitude. Okay, in the next page of my diary, I've got a story about the British cycling team in 2003 that was referred to in Atomic Habits, the book. This was a fascinating story. This team had not won many Olympic Games. I think it was one they won prior to 2003. And in 2003, a new coach came in, and this coach was hell-bent on making marginal changes to this team. Really, really incremental changes that no other bike team was really doing. So he changed the pillows that they slept on. He hired a surgeon to teach them how to wash their hands properly so that they wouldn't get sick as often. He sprayed the inside, he painted the inside of their training facility white so that it would be easier to recognize dust particles, which affects the bikes and which affects their health. And over time, the plan was that if you change 1% of something that no one else is doing, and if you change 10 of those activities, that's 10% of growth. That is a lot of growth. And by doing this, this British cycling team ended up winning a lot in that Olympics. Let me just pull up the statistics. So in just 5 years, they won 60% of gold medals at the Olympics. And 4 years after that, they set 9 Olympic records. I think looking at this closely and analysing this isn't too hard to believe, these achievements. They did what the other teams were doing in terms of training, but they went above and beyond with things that the other teams weren't doing. And that separated them from the rest. That really gave them an advantage. And I think this strategy was brilliant. Rather than exhausting themselves, rather than burning themselves out, they recognised that they were losing. They recognised that they don't have to train harder in the spaces that everyone else is doing. They just have to look externally. They have to look outside of what they're already doing and change those elements. So for some, it could be, I'm going to the gym for an hour a day. To bulk up or lose weight, I should start going for 2 hours. But maybe you could start changing your diet. Maybe you could drink more water. Maybe you can cut out sugar. Maybe you can walk an extra 50 meters. Maybe you can stop catching the bus. So these little things that you can do that will give you these gains. It's about the 1%ers. And if you do that for enough activities throughout your life, you'll start seeing the results. And they won't be things that you recognize consciously most of the time. They'll just be things that add up over time. They add up over time. And you'll be keeping this one element the same, but these 1%ers will stack up, and eventually these will merge, and you'll have increased 50%, 60%. So I think that's a really important story that book told. And it does play into the role of play into the story and the idea of Atomic Habits. Now, before I end this podcast, I've got 2 stories that I wanted to tell. The first was when I used to play cricket. I was a talented cricketer. I was a good cricketer. I worked hard. My parents, took me to trainings. They hired coaches for me. I was a good cricketer. I was on the pathway that many aspiring young talented cricketers were on. There was this particular team that I was trying out for, and I didn't get picked in that team. And I remember being very upset about it, and I remember being frustrated about it also. I felt like I deserved to be in that team. I blamed circumstances like I'm from the Northern Territory, which is a territory that doesn't get represented highly in these teams. I blamed the selectors for being biased, or I blamed everything. And 2 years later, I moved to Adelaide, and I began training with one of the boys that had been selected in the team that I wasn't. And I very, very quickly realised that my mentality, my blaming everything on everything else, was not justifiable in any way, shape or form. The work this boy was putting in was so much more than me, and even though maybe he would have only been a little bit better than me, or maybe 10 or 20 or 30% better than me, the work that he was putting in to his craft to the sport was double, triple times more than me. A story was we had frequent 2 kilometre running time trials, which essentially just means that you time yourself, or people time you running for 2 kilometres and see how fast you can do it. Now, a good time for the 2 kilometre time trial is something around 7 minutes. And that's what they expected from you. They expected, under 7 minutes. And before the 2 kilometre time trials, I would go running for a month prior to that. So I would go very hard in running every day for a month before this 2 kilometre time trial, thinking that that would be enough, more than enough, to get me the score that I wanted. Now, when the 2 kilometre time trial day came around, I didn't get the score. And my friend that had been selected in the team that I've talked about throughout this story, he got, I think it was something ridiculous, like 6 minutes 10. I mean, he blew the score out of the water. He absolutely demolished it. Meanwhile, I, in that beep test, in that running time trial, got 7 minutes 50. A very slow score compared to him. And not long later, he had told me that he had run 2 kilometres every single day for a whole year before that 2 kilometre time trial. I knew then that I couldn't blame anything or anyone else after that. And I knew then that there's a reason why I didn't get picked in the team. There was a reason why I didn't get the desired score. It was simply because I wasn't putting in the work. It wasn't because of the selectors were biased. I was disadvantaged coming from this place. I'm brown, I'm this, I'm that. It wasn't any of that. It was simply I didn't put in the work. So that was a tremendous lesson that I learned right there and there. And I'm so grateful that I learned that so early, because after that, it taught me to take 100% accountability for my life. From then on, I wasn't blaming any external circumstances. If I'm not getting picked for a job interview, if I'm not getting the job, if I'm not getting a call back, if this person doesn't like me, if this person doesn't like me, it's my fault. It's not their fault. It's not the world's fault. It's my fault. The second story that I have for you is a story from Kobe Bryant. He was giving a talk at this function, at this event, and one of the stories that he told and one of the pieces of advice that he gave was, imagine if you're getting up at 9 and you're training from 11 to 12. Train for an hour, you go home, you rest, you recover, you eat. You go back at it again, 2 to 4. You go home, rest, recover, you go back again, 7 to 9. Now imagine that you wake up at, he said 2 a.m. There's not many people waking up at 2 a.m, but let's just imagine this. You wake up at 2 a.m, you eat breakfast, you shower, get from training from 4 to 6. Go home, you recover, you rest, you sleep. Again, training from 8 to 10. Back at it, 9 to 11. Then again, rest, recover, back at it again, 2 to 4. Again, rest, recover, back at it again, 7 to 9. Now, over a 2-year span, if you do this, you get so much more work done by simply waking up 3, 4, 5 hours earlier. And Kobe essentially said that no matter what, if you're doing that, by the time the tryouts, the trials come, no matter what work people are putting in over the summer, they're never going to be able to catch up to you. They're not going to be able to catch up to you because those summers that you put in grinding when no one else was, they're the key to your success. And again, this ties back to my previous point. When you blame someone else for something, you're stripping yourself from accountability and you're really shutting off this side to your brain, this learning side of your brain that asks questions about how people have got to where they've got to. Now, you could look at someone and say, you've got to where you've got to because you are this, you are that, you look like that, and I don't look like that. But the truth is, we don't really know anyone else's story. And my friend taught me that we don't really know how hard people are working behind the scenes. And I think the beautiful thing and the freeing thing about taking accountability is you're able to learn from others. You're able to critique yourself, and you're able to pick apart stories and aspects of other people's lives and training and their regimen that you can take for yourself, and opens up a whole different aspect to your learning. One more piece of advice that I wanted to give for trusting the process of habits is we have a tendency to look to people on social media that are already hyper successful, that have already gone on and achieved great things. And although this is motivating and inspiring, sometimes coming from a place like the Territory or coming from small towns, it is disheartening in the sense that there's not many people you can look up to who have gone on to do successful things coming from your town. Something really important that I've implemented is, yes, being inspired by the greats, being inspired by the leaders and taking advice from them, but also being open to being inspired by your friends, being inspired by those in your community that are already doing great things. And that doesn't mean that they have to be multimillionaires or billionaires to be classed as successful. Despite the fact that you might want to get there, you can still take things from them and be inspired by them. When I started being inspired by the tradie who runs his own company and returns 300,000 profit a year, or the window cleaner who does the same thing and gets $170,000, $180,000 profit a year, it really started opening my eyes up about how you can make money and how important it is to just get started. Don't look to these big people who are really far away from you for that initial motivation. Look around your community. Look at people who have just started, who are putting their name out there, who are doing things that you wouldn't expect. I had a friend just recently start a company, and rather than looking at Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or these people who have started really successful, amazing companies, I'm looking up to him saying, you've started a company 3 months ago and you've already got paying clients. It's unbelievable. And all of that by just starting and trusting the process. Now, that's the end of the podcast. Thanks for listening. As I said, I'm going to do this every week. I'm going to review a book, a self-development book preferably, but it can be any type of book that gives me inspiration, that makes me want to implement something that I've learned into my own life. And then I'll review it. I'll do a concept a week. Let me know if you enjoyed this. Let me know if you got something from this. Let me know if I'm talking out of my ass. Any feedback, critiques are advised, recommended, and appreciated. So thanks for listening, and I've really enjoyed this. I'll see you next week.